Well, hello and welcome to the Poetry Peacast. I'm Patricia and we're off again, out of the gates, and I'd love to say thundering down the track, but I'm going to leave that to you to decide as you listen. Indeed, I'm leaving a lot to you this week. It's an interactive Peacast and there's some homework for you to do. I'll reveal what it is as we go along. But first up, a reminder that Poetry Pea will be accepting haiku submissions for the annual Tendrils Journal. Submissions open on the 1st of April, I hope you haven't missed it, and will run for only 15 days. So get ready to go and start thinking about what you're going to send me, or if you're listening to this late, get ready, get them in. And if you're listening to it so late that you've missed it, I'm really sorry about that. There is an agenda on the website. Check it out and see what we're up to at the moment. Join in. It's fun. I do have a little hint for you though. Haiku and senryu have to be strong. And if I'm honest, I'm not that keen of one-liners in a haibun, which is ironic, really, because this is our final podcast on the one-line haiku. Well, I say final, but I don't think it's going to be the final podcast. I might have to move on for a little while. My head is absolutely spinning, but we will come back because there's so much poetry I need to bring you. My head is spinning because I've had quite a lot of thinking to do. And once again, my apologies for not getting last week's episode together. But I know from your feedback that you very much enjoyed hearing Carla Ramesh, which is great. But now I have a little presentation for you. You can listen in audio form, or you can watch on YouTube and you can read the slides as we go along. The presentation, as I said, is the last in this current series on one-line haiku and senryu. And my head was spinning because I had questions left over from our previous 2 episodes. And I'm hoping to answer them here. But remember, if you disagree with anything, I genuinely love to hear from you. If you can point to credible academic sources, or you've simply got a compelling argument of your own, do share it with me. The more voices we bring into the conversation, the richer it becomes. And who knows, I can make a communal podcast on one-line haiku and senryu. So let's start with the first question. Have we, with our attempts at one-line poetry, appropriated the Japanese short form? Of course, I can only look at this from the Western point of view. And if there's anyone out there in Japan listening and disagrees with me or has a point of view you'd like to share, do let me know. But I'm going to approach this one in general terms because the question is relevant whatever form of haiku we're talking about, I think. And I wanted to start with a definition. What does appropriation mean? Well, according to my Collins English Dictionary, it means the act of taking for one's own use. So have we taken the Japanese haiku and senryu and developed something for our own use, all of our own? And I struggle with this. I think I've been saying for some time, or perhaps it was only in my head, who knows, that we in the West learn of Japanese haiku through the usual routes, translations by Blythe, Higginson, Hamill, Suzuki, Shirani, etc., whose translations come to us with opinions about what Japanese haiku are. And these translations and these opinions are in turn influenced by Western ideas of poetry. Well, they're often influenced by Western ideas of poetry. So, as we learn about Japanese haiku, we have a lot of conflicting opinions and thoughts out there. So maybe we could have a quick look at some of the movements that have influenced English language haiku, and I mean a very quick look. We'll look in more detail another time. And we'll start with Imagism and a poem by Amy Lowell from 1919, which is distinctly haikai, maybe more tanka than haiku, though. And the title is Autumn. All day I have watched the purple vine leaves fall into the water, and now in the moonlight they still fall, but each leaf is fringed with silver. Autumn. All day I have watched the purple vine leaves fall into the water, and now in the moonlight they still fall, but each leaf is fringed with silver. And if you want to chase that up, you can find that poem by Amy Lowell in Poetry from an edition in 1919. And then, of course, there are the beat poets, heavily influenced by Zen. And this might not be the most Zen of Kerouac's poems, but I enjoyed it, so I thought I'd read it for you. In the back of the supermarket, in the parking lot weeds, purple flowers. In the back of the supermarket, in the parking lot weeds, purple flowers. And that's Jack Kerouac. It's from his book of haikus, which I enjoyed immensely and would recommend if you'd like to read more of his work. I'll put a link in the show notes. And then we have minimalism, which I have to admit was very appealing to me at one time. For example, this poem of Issa's, given to us by Robert Hass, who I find tends to keep his work very clean and minimal. You might disagree, of course. Don't worry, spiders. I keep house casually. Don't worry, spiders. I keep house casually. And that's Issa, translated by Robert Hass. And this is a good poem to use because I was able to find many versions of it through the website Edo Flourishing. You know where the link will be. Here's some more. Spiders in the corners. Don't worry. I'm not going to sweep them. Spiders in the corners. Don't worry. I'm not going to sweep them. By the translator, R.H. Blythe. Corner spider, rest easy, my soot broom is idle. Corner spider, rest easy, my soot broom is idle. And that one was translated by David Lanouille. Spiders in the corner, don't you be anxious, I won't break your webs. Spiders in the corner, don't be anxious, I won't break your webs. And that one was translated by Lewis Mackenzie. And one last one. Spiders in the corner, don't worry, I won't sweep your house. Spiders in the corner, don't worry, I won't sweep your house. And that one was translated by Naneo Sakaki. Anyway, I could go on about the different forms and the different influences, but I won't because Bruce Ross has written on this subject a very interesting essay, Haiku Mainstream, The Path of Traditional Haiku in America, and I'll put a link in the notes so you can have a read yourself if you're interested. These poems are a natural segue into translations and the influence the translators play on our understanding of haiku. Not so many of us English writers speak, read, or write Japanese, so naturally, we had to learn about the Japanese haiku through translations. And as I said, these were often altered by prevailing poetry influences. And of course, experiments need to be taken into account, because we do like an experiment. Hiroaki Sato suggests in his work on haiku that as English language writers, we are more venturesome, more willing to experiment than our Japanese counterparts. And I have a question for you. Don't you think that as you and I experiment with our poetry, we might be traveling further and further from the original, from the essence of the Japanese short form? Maybe we create something that we call haiku, but is it becoming something of a spin-off of the Japanese haiku? But what of the one-line specifically? What I've talked about so far can apply to 1 or 3 lines. But there is an added complication with the one-line that Japanese haiku are written in a monolinear form. And there's an obvious reason for that. When writing literature in the Japanese language, you write vertically, so I understand. Then it could be argued that we too should write in a monolinear form, whether we write vertically or horizontally. However, the Japanese vertical haiku would have a cut, which is where we would naturally put a line break, isn't it? Oh, as I think about this, I'm wondering, am I arguing myself into a position whereby the 2-line haiku is the way to go? Don't worry. I have rhythm up my sleeve, and that, to me, anyway, dictates that often a haiku subdivides into a 3-line poem. We'll look at rhythm another time. But my point is that in English language poetry, it would be more natural to emphasize the cut with a line break or maybe punctuation, perhaps both. Clayton Beach had something relevant to say about one-line poems in an article in Juxta 4. You know where the link will be. He says, while the one-line haiku has a rich canon in the English language and the format has some very strong merits in terms of literary aesthetics and novel techniques that have grown from it organically over time, it is not a particularly accurate reflection of Japanese practice and can be seen more as an evolution within English language haiku than a traditionalist interpretation. Ooh. So when I started thinking about this, I thought I might well come down on the side of yes, we have appropriated the Japanese form. That was exactly what we'd done, or were in the process of doing. But then I worked my way through the thought processes, part of which included listening to what Carla was saying about the ideas around Zen in last week's podcast. You know, that the idea traveled from India via China to Japan. And then, of course, Japan embraced it and made it its own. And as I was thinking things through, I became less certain that we had appropriated the Japanese short form. Perhaps what we have is a cross-cultural exchange. But a note of caution. We might be one small step from appropriation. Clayton Beach might just have had a point when he said of one-liners that they are not a particularly accurate reflection of Japanese practice and can be seen more as an evolution than a traditionalist interpretation. So something else for us to think about. At what point do we hold our hands up and say we have experimented so much with this form that it can no longer be called haiku or senryu? Okay, next question. Do English language one-liners conform to our idea of English language 3-line haiku and senryu? And you know, it's been so long since I started to look at this question, I'm not entirely sure what I was thinking about. So I had a little head wobble and decided this is what I meant. In writing one line, have we sometimes forgotten the basics of haiku and senryu? Which seems a bit like an extension of the first question, really. When I was reading around this topic, I came upon an article by Jim Cation in Juxta 1, which I think unwittingly answers this question for me. He said, monoku, however, have not arisen out of a need simply to be different, They actually offer a range of technical and stylistic opportunities that are not available to the three-line haiku, nor even, so far as I am able to ascertain, to the Japanese single vertical line form. It offers resources that one just can't find elsewhere in haiku. And I read this and I reread it and I thought, is this not just a confirmation that at least some one-line haiku are at best pushing the limits of the haiku form? At worst, not haiku at all. Because if you're using technical and stylistic opportunities not available in the three-line form, then sometimes, maybe even often, you'll not be writing haiku, and possibly not senryu either. So here's your first bit of homework. Let's play the game haiku, senryu, or short poem again. I'm not going to give you my thoughts now. You'll have to nip over to the show notes, and you can see whether you and I agree or not. So here's the first poem. Kite till its spine is broken. Kite till its spine is broken. By Ajay Agyeba, from his book Tales of the Kites. Leaf light. Leaf light. And that's by Alan Burns, from SXSE 16.2 in 2009. It's analysed in the Haiku Foundation revirals. There'll be a link in the show notes. And another one that's analysed in revirals. Speechless this evening, I'm a lamp. Speechless this evening, I'm a lamp. By Ella Abutbul, originally in Modern Haiku, volume 57.1. A junction without signboards, my palm. A junction without signboards, my palm. By Chidamba Navalgund, from The Sound of Healing. So my current answer to the question, do English language one-liners conform to our idea of English language three-line haiku and senryu, is not all the time, and our excitement about experimentation sometimes overcomes our knowledge of the form, overrides it even. Now, Mr. Cation, in the same article I referred to, answers another one of my questions. Why did we start writing one-liners in the first place, and why have they taken off? He says, we started because of the need to be different, the ability to use techniques and styles not available in the three-line form, and that where there is new territory, poets will colonize. And he's right, isn't he? We see something new, we're intrigued, and we want to try it for ourselves. And I'll just add the obvious. They might be an attempt to copy the Japanese monolinear form. Okay, 2 questions left. We're on the home stretch, but I warn you, these are probably 2 of the most controversial questions, and I think you might well disagree with my conclusions. That's okay, though. To get to the nub of things, we need to share our opinions, don't we? Don't be shy. Email me. I can take it. So, the first of these 2 controversial questions, is a one-line haiku a senryu a one-liner because the poet says it is? You know what? I'm just going to go for it and say no. No, it isn't. We had a look at some of the techniques and styles in parts 1 and 2, and you'll remember there was one poet, John Wills, about whom I previously podcasted, episode 33 of the 8th series, by the way. He's a fabulous poet. If you're not familiar with his work, please start there, and you'll definitely want to read on. Anyway, Wills wrote a number of one-line haiku, which were either later edited into 3 lines or had been conceived as 3 lines and edited to 1. And I just happened across an article in an old edition of Frog Pond in which Cor Vanden Heuvel discussed, amongst other things, John Wills's book Up a Distant Ridge, a book of one-liners. He said something about that book that rings bells with me. Maybe you too. Because he said, I've only come to the conclusion that most of the haiku in it are basically 3-liners. And if you've read it, you might think he had a point, didn't he? So I thought it might be interesting for you to put an editor's hat on, because often I'll read and reread a piece of work and wonder, why did the poets choose to write it as a 1-line rather than a 3-line poem? And vice versa, actually. So more homework. Let's play 1-line or 3. In this case, I'm going to read you some poems which are originally 1-line and then reread them as 3-liners, and you can decide which works best for you. Again, I'm not going to give my opinions here. You need to go to the show notes. Perhaps you'll agree with me. Perhaps you'll write and say, Patricia, it's obviously a 1-line poem because ... And I'd be extremely grateful. Remember, if you're scribbling around and missing things, you can see these slides on the YouTube channel, or of course, check the show notes. So let's play 1-line or 3. Snowy night, standing at the fridge, shirtless. Snowy night, standing at the fridge, shirtless. James Nippen, from Modern Haiku, Volume 56.2, 2025. And now the 3-line version. Snowy night, standing at the fridge, shirtless. Snowy night, standing at the fridge, shirtless. Next poem. Carousel horse riding the last day of summer. Carousel horse riding the last day of summer. By Anne Sullivan, from The Heron's Nest in September 2024. And as a 3-line version, carousel horse riding the last day of summer. Carousel horse riding the last day of summer. Cataract winter, the drift of snow on a lens. Cataract winter, the drift of snow on a lens. By Peter Jastrzębski in Poetry Pea 124. And the 3-line version, cataract winter, the drift of snow on a lens. Cataract winter, the drift of snow on a lens. Atlas, the seeds of winter in the morning sky. Atlas, the seeds of winter in the morning sky. Juro J. from Modern Haiku 40.1 in 2009. And as a 3-line version, Atlas, the seeds of winter in the morning sky. Atlas, the seeds of winter in the morning sky. Well, I've given you something to think about there. How about another question that could be quite controversial? Are some of the one-liners we are seeing in our haiku and senryu journals actually poetry? Ooh. Well, this is difficult, and I hope I don't step on any toes answering it. I think I'll start in general terms by saying that there is a difference in expectation between English language poetry and English language haiku and senryu. The former has such a wide range and variations of technique and style, and of course tends to be more wordy, more ornate, employing devices such as simile, often tells you rather than shows you. And the haiku and senryu are, of course, not at all wordy, but are quite technical nonetheless. If you think about it in terms of art, Western poetry is often a detailed painting, and haiku and senryu a sketched outline. So if, like me, you were brought up reading poets like Carol Ann Duffy, Wordsworth, Seamus Heaney, Walt Whitman, Robert Frost, then coming to haiku, you have to rethink your idea of poetry and adjust your writing style. I just wanted to set that out to set your expectations and give you an idea of the origin of the following thoughts and conclusions. Although one-line haiku and senryu do now have a considerable history in the English language short form, I read contemporary one-liners, well, not just contemporary, go back to the beginning, and wonder, are they wordplay or are they poetry? Perhaps both. Editor's hat on again, please. More homework. This time we're going to play wordplay or poetry. My thoughts, of course, will be in the show notes. Here we go. Wordplay or poetry, or both. I inch, and only sometimes as far as the twisted pole gone in spare colours. I inch, and only sometimes as far as the twisted pole gone in spare colours. By John Ashbery, and that was in Haiku in English, edited by Acacian, Burns and Collins. Jam-packed elevator, every button pushed. Jam-packed elevator, every button pushed. By John Stevenson, also printed in Haiku in English. Clear winter sky, over the radio the first bombs. Clear winter sky, over the radio the first bombs. By Dorothy Howard, Haiku in English. Rain, cairn, crow. Rain, cairn, crow. By Stuart Quinn, from Haiku in English. An icicle, the moon drifting through it. An icicle, the moon drifting through it. Matsuo Allard, from the Haiku Anthology, 3rd edition. A butterfly lands on Park Place. A butterfly lands on Park Place. Alexis Rotella, the Haiku Anthology, 3rd edition. Shark. Shark. Alexis Rotella, Frog Pond, 6.4, 1983. I'm going to have to describe this last one to you. It is an exclamation mark followed by rain. Exclamation mark, rain. By Paul Reps, from The Square Sun, Square Moon, 1967. I want to avoid spoiler alerts for your homework, but I would just say in conclusion that much of the one-line haiku and senryu I come across could be categorized as poetry, but it's the experimentation that often troubles me. When haikai poetry had descended into a hodgepodge of drivel, the great masters of haikai literature tried time and again to elevate it to its heights. With our experimentation, we need to make sure we're not descending to those depths again. So I think my answer to the question, are some of the one-liners we are seeing in our haiku senryu journals actually poetry, would be that one-line haiku and senryu can be poetry, but we should take care not to put experimentation over poetry. Let's not get over-enthusiastic about our experiments, and remember that first and foremost, you and I are poets. So I think with that, I've gone about as far as I can in answering my remaining questions on the topic of one-line haiku. For now, at least. There's certainly more to explore, especially if you send me in your thoughts. And of course, I have so much more poetry I'd love to share with you. But I have to leave it there for a little while, because if I'm honest, my brain is frazzled. I will, however, be following this up with an essay bringing together the ideas from all three of these one-line episodes. So keep an eye out for that. Now, next week, I'm going to be reading some original poetry written by you and for you. And I've recorded the session with the judges already. It was a cracking session. Don't miss it. And the week after that, it will be original poetry from the Poetry Pea video prompt. I'm really looking forward to diving into all that wonderful work. There's oodles and oodles of original poetry, which is, after all, what Poetry Pea is about. Poetry out loud. But before I head off for a cup of tea and a bicky, a few bits of housekeeping. Don't forget to look at the video prompt on YouTube and add your poems in the comments. Remember, if it's not in the comments under the video, it is not submitted. And then start getting your haibun ready to submit to our annual haibun journal, Tendrils. The submission window is very short, 1st to the 15th of April. If you can, please think of supporting the podcast and keeping us going. You can buy a membership, you can buy a coffee, you could make a donation via PayPal, or just tell everyone you know about us. Spread the word. And finally, if you're not already signed up to the newsletter, do get that sorted. There's always little bits and bobs you won't want to miss. And that's where you'll hear about them first. And maybe it will be the only place you hear about a few things. Okay. Thank you so much for being with me today. Thank you if you helped out with your thoughts, your poetry, and your opinions. As I've said, more are welcome, and I'm more than happy if you disagree with me. More than happy. But until next week, keep writing. And don't forget to check out the episode webpage for my thoughts on the poetry I've read out today, my answers on the little games we've played. And I'd love to know, are we agreeing or not? Ciao.